Welcome back to this tutorial series. In this tutorial, we're going to create a user interface with the SAP Cloud Application Programming Model and our project that's designed to be deployed and tested on SAP HANA Cloud. So in this tutorial, we're going to be using services based upon the SAP Cloud Application Programming Model, specifically the Node.js flavor. And we're going to use the SAP Fiori wizard to create a user interface for our existing project. You're going to learn how to create an SAP Fiori web interface and how to configure the application router to test that user interface from the Business Application Studio. Now, the major prerequisite for this tutorial is that you've completed the previous tutorial in this series, and in that tutorial, we took our existing Cloud Application Programming Model project, we added database artifacts to it, we deployed those database artifacts to the HANA database, and we loaded some data into them. So we're ready to now visualize our services that we modeled in that previous tutorial as well, using a Fiori UI. So let's go ahead and return to our project. Now, in the previous exercise, we deployed to the HANA database, but we want to be able to also test our services from the Business Application Studio and have it run against the remote HANA database as well. Now, when we originally looked at this, our database module, when we did the bind to connect it to the HANA database, it wrote a little env file out. And this .env file allows us, that's where the project stores this configuration of how to connect the remote HANA database. You know, where's the URL for the remote HANA database? What schema or HDI container is it targeting? What username, password, certificate, things like that should it use to connect to the HANA database? Now, we're going to use very similar configuration to connect to the HANA database for our CAP services when it runs, but we're not going to have to use a local file like the deployer does, like this .env. Instead, the Cloud Application Programming Model has a feature that allows us to do hybrid testing, but without storing any of these credentials or connection settings in a local file. It has something that we have a command called CDS bind, and that's going to write a little configuration file, but as we'll see here in a minute, it is only going to save the information about what Cloud Foundry, the space and org that we're targeting, and every time we run the application, it's going to look up those credentials dynamically so that they're never stored. This is a much more secure way of doing hybrid testing in your application because we aren't storing credentials or connection information locally. So let's set that up for our project. This is a one-time thing we have to do once in our project. I'm just going to go here and I'm going to open a new terminal. And from the terminal, I'm going to use the command cds bind. You have to tell it what you want to bind to, and that's going to be our HDI container, my HANA app dev, and then the key, the service key for that container, and we can use the one that was automatically created by the Business Application Studio. And it's retrieving that information from Cloud Foundry, binding it, and it wrote it out to this .cdsrc private JSON file. And it shows us also that now we can test our application. We can run our services using CDS watch profile hybrid, and it automatically use this configuration file to fetch the credentials every time the service runs. You notice there are no credentials, there's no URL for the HANA database itself, only what Cloud Foundry endpoint that we are configured for. The rest of the information will be looked up dynamically each time we run. Now, we probably have everything we need locally because we did an npm install earlier, but I'm just going to do another one just to be safe. Yep, it came back real fast, so we're not missing anything. Now, the only other thing that we need to do is right now our project is set up for real XSUAA security. And we're going to use that later in our testing and in a subsequent tutorial. But for now, we first want to test without all the security configuration that's necessary for authentication and authorization setup. So to do this, we can turn off the initial configuration of the authentication. Right now, it's set up in the package JSON to require authentication XSUAA. That's good, but maybe our initial test, we're not quite ready for that yet. There's some other configuration that we're going to need to make that fully work. So in the meantime, I'm just going to change this XSUAA auth type to mocked. And now it's going to mock the authentication, so we're going to be able to test without full authentication setup. All right, now we're basically ready to test our services that we defined in the previous tutorial. And to do that, we can use that command that it suggested, CDS watch profile hybrid. And that's going to start our CAP server. It's going to load the definition, but it's also going to connect to the HANA database. You see it looked up the bindings that were defined in the JSON file, but then it used that to go to Cloud Foundry, look up the credentials, and actually connect to the HANA database. So what we have is we have a server that's running here in the terminal in the Business Application Studio. See, it's running on localhost 4004, but it's really connecting when we make requests to that service. It's really going to connect to the remote HANA database and fetch data for it. It's a really nice way to do this hybrid testing. I don't have to deploy my whole application to Cloud Foundry in order to test it with real data coming from the back-end HANA database. Now, there was a little pop-up here, and I spoke too long, but the pop-up would have allowed me to open another browser tab to immediately test this link. But I can go ahead and do Control-click on the URL, and it's going to do the same thing. And you notice what it did here is it didn't actually open localhost, because localhost is only relevant inside the shell of the virtual machine that we're connecting to with the browser. The Business Application Studio is smart enough to translate that into a real addressable external URL. For the port that I'm running on, the workspace that I'm connected to. So this is unique to my little dev space that's temporarily running in the Business Application Studio. I'm connecting to that Linux virtual machine that's running in the cloud that my web browser is connecting to, and now I'm able to test from it as well. And this is the service that's running right here. And we see the test page for the Cloud Application Programming Model here. And the other thing, if you miss the little pop-up and you don't want to press Control-click on there, there's another way to get to open this as well. You can also do View and go to the command palette, and then just type in ports, and you're going to get the option to ports preview, and it's going to show you any of the ports that are currently running something that's exposed that can be connected to with a web browser. And you can also just click here. It's going to open the same thing in another browser window. So just multiple ways to get to the same thing in case you miss the other options. From here, we can go ahead and test our service. For instance, I can look at the metadata of my OData service, all generated by the Cloud Application Programming Model for me. I can look at the entities that are exposed, the header, the item, the country text, and I can look at the data. So I want to look at the header data, and this data is coming from the back-end HANA database, but coming through the service, the Node.js service that's running inside the shell temporarily in the SAP Business Application Studio. So this is once again a great way to do some local testing. Let me just go back here, and if actually, what I want to do, I want to go to the interaction items next, and we see here that we've got some English descriptions. We got one German description. I'll show you another little feature. We can do all kinds of testing on the command line because all the OData parameters and options they can almost all be added to the URL parameters here, so it makes it really easy to test. So for instance, I can just come here and add $, search equals DE, and now it's pulled back any data, any record that has DE in it. So you see not only language DE, but also where DE appears in the log text attribute as well. So just showing you some of the features of OData. Now we're not going to go into everything else. The tutorial has some links if you want to read more about OData in general or how OData is used by SAP UI5. But for our purposes, we know that our service is running, it's good. So now we can start thinking about utilizing this from a Fiori UI. So I'll just leave this running. I'll bounce back here to the first page, but let's go back to the Business Application Studio, because now I want to configure my project to use the application router. Now this was added when we initially generated the project with the initial wizard, but this is the first time we're really going to use this module. And it's important because it's going to become the primary entry point for our application. And every request for either the service or the UI is going to be coming in through the application router and then routed to the subsequent backend services. And that's also going to be important for how we do authentication and authorization, because that all has to come in through the application router to redirect to the identity provider to get you logged in. If we try to hit our service directly, we won't get that redirect to the identity provider. So all requests are going to have to come in through the application router. Now, if we look at what was generated by the wizard, there's not a whole lot in here right now. We've got a default env JSON for configuring testing of the environment. We've got a package JSON. We've got an XSApp JSON. That's where the application router configuration will be stored. If we look at the package JSON, very similar to the package JSON in the root of the project that defines the cloud application programming model dependencies, we have a single dependency here to load at SAP App Router. So the application router is just another Node.js module that's published on the internet that you can pull into your project and utilize that way. And the application router itself, to get it into our project, we're going to need to do another npm install. So let me just open another terminal window here. Let's open a second one down here. And I'm going to change directory, CD, into the app folder. Now I'm targeting the app folder. See, there it's got its own package JSON file. So when I run npm install in this folder, it's going to use the definition in the package JSON file of this folder to install the application router into our project as well. So I'll go ahead and kick that off. It'll take a second to install the application router. 245 packages were added to our application, but now in a node modules folder, not in the root, like we did in the previous tutorial when we installed, did npm install for the package JSON of the cloud application programming model itself, but now installed within the folder of app, of the application router. Now, the application router on startup is going to scan this XSApp JSON file. And that's going to tell it all the routing patterns to send the request to the right destination, whether that's the file system to serve out, static HTML supporting files, or whether that's to route to another service like the CAP service to redirect requests to the OData service that we have as part of our CAP application. The initial XSApp JSON that you see here is what was generated by the wizard when we created the project, and it's like just like the previous setting. It's already set up to use real security, and that's great. I love the fact that it starts off with real security, but we're not quite ready to tackle that yet. So just like we did with the package JSON and the CAP configuration to turn off some of those security settings, we're going to do the same thing here temporarily. We're going to change this configuration file so it will disable the security checks. So one thing we're going to do is, I'm just going to bring in a whole new version of this file, but I'll point out the major differences is basically we're telling it authentication method none, taking that away from the default of requiring authentication. And we took the authentication settings off of each of the routes. This is going to allow us to be able to do initial testing without any security, and then we'll add the security later. Okay. The other thing that you'll see in this configuration is that it's declaring a wildcard here. What you see is if any requests come in looking for a path, a URL path of app, and then anything after that, then it's going to redirect to the local file system of the app directory, and it's going to serve out those files statically. But if it sees anything any wildcard, any other wildcard, it will send that to the CAP service. Now, this works because these are processed in order. So the order that you list things in is very important. It's going to try to match this first, and if anything has app in the URL, then it stops processing. As soon as it finds one match, it forwards that request wherever it's told to forward it, and it doesn't keep checking. So that's why the structure, the order of these are important. You always have sort of a catch-all at the end, and in this case, our catch-all is going to our CAP service. All right. Next, we're ready to generate our Fiori web interface. We've got enough configuration here in our CAP application that we're ready for that. So let's trigger another wizard here. I'm just going to go to the command palette. This is often how you're triggering wizards after the fact, after your initial project creation. I'm just going to type Fiori, and I'm going to see all the commands that are available that are related to working with Fiori applications. But we're going to want the one for Open Application Generator. That's going to start the Fiori project wizard. So go ahead and click that, and we'll let the wizard load up here. There we are. We're going to make sure our template type is set to Fiori. And then we want, you see many different types of Fiori applications, different styles, different floor plans, if you will. We want the one for the work list page. That's what we're going to do in this particular tutorial. Then I'll go ahead and say next. Now we have to tell the application what it's connecting to get its backend data. What kind of services is it going to call? And this is pretty easy because it's in the same project as our CAP service. And we have a special setting for that to say use local CAP project. When I do that, it reads the definition from the CAP side of things. It's reading our service definition right from the same project, and it's already pulled it out. It's all our catalog service from running from the Node.js flavor of CAP. It's filled all that in for us. It's great. It found everything we needed there. We can just go on to the next step. The next step wants to know what entities do we want to use from that service. Remember, we had 4 entities in our service. We've got the header, the items, the countries, and the country text. Well, we're going to start with the header. We're going to do a simple parent-child relationship here. We're going to start with the parent entity, and then we're going to allow navigation into the child entity, which is the items. And we are going to also allow the columns and list page selection if none already exist. Yes, that will generate some Fiori annotations for us, so our UI will be really nice and ready to use. And then the last step is just some general project attributes, like what do we want the name of our application to be, interaction items, and a title that will go at the top of the page, interaction items list, and then the same thing for a description. Give it the same description that I gave it a title. We can say what SAP UI5 version do we want to target. Probably best just to go with the default unless you have a specific version that you want to target. Do we want to add deployment configuration to MTA YAML? No, we don't need that for this particular project. It's already been set up by the initial project wizard. Do I want to add Fiori Launchpad configuration? No, not for this particular tutorial. We're not going to utilize the Fiori Launchpad. And do we want to configure any advanced options? No, we'll go with just the basic options. And then we'll go ahead and finish. And this is generating the application. You see inside the app folder, it's creating a whole group of subfolders with the Fiori configuration. So we'll give that just a minute to finish up. There we are, all done. And in addition, we've got the application information overview page, if you will, that tells you a little bit about the application that's just been generated and allows you to navigate into different parts of it. We see that it's an OData v4 Fiori application pointing to a CAP Node.js. We've got different pages that have already been defined by the wizard, an object page, a list report page. And then there's some actions that you can do, like previewing the application or already setting up and changing some things about it. But we're good at this point. We'll just go with what the wizard generated initially. And what we want to do is, if your application is still running, I left my application running, and it automatically picks up changes to my project. So I don't need to stop and restart it. But if you did accidentally stop it, or you took a break at some point, just make sure that you start your application again. Remember the CDS watch profile hybrid command if you need to restart it. You see that up here in my initial command, CDS watch profile hybrid, but mine's still running. So if I come back over here to the initial page, refresh it, there we are. We now see that under web applications, we've got our Fiori application listed here, the index HTML that was generated by the wizard. So our application is ready to go ahead and test. If I just click on this, it's going to load the Fiori application that was generated by the wizard. There's the initial page that lists our 4 header records, and I can click on any of these header records, and it's going to take me to a detailed page that's going to show you more details about it. Pretty basic. At this point, we could certainly go in and tweak the Fiori UI by changing annotations, but that's good enough to get us started and show us the mechanics of what we're running here. Now, at this point, we could go ahead and run this via the application router as well. If we wanted to do that, and this is going to become more important in the next phase of this tutorial once we add authentication. But here from this the app folder, we could do the same thing. We could do an npm start, and that's going to actually load up the application router. And see, it's running on port 5000. We'll go ahead and open that in another tab, and it looks the same. I mean, if I go back and forth here, I'll go back. The URL is different. What's running on port 4004, this one's running on port 5000, but because of the routing rules that we put in and the redirect to the CAP service, we're seeing all the same things. If I come here to the header, I'm still seeing the CAP service. If I come here to the UI, I'm going to see the same UI, but now it is being served out by the application router. And as I said, no real visible difference to you at this point, but in the next tutorial, we are going to add user authentication to our application. You're going to see exactly why we set up the application router, because it's going to be critical to how that works.